all of us have said regularly, and we can't say it enough, what the government has done and the rollout with our vaccine has been absolutely brilliant. It's a really, really great start. We're on the way. And more good news this morning with this extra vaccine coming online. And what can you tell us about it? When potentially could it come into circulation with some of the others that we have?
Well, you're right. We've ordered 60 million of these jabs, and we did that in August. And so great call by the vaccination task force to identify this along with the other vaccines that we have purchased. Really, really great news. And of course, the next stage is a regulatory approval by the MHRA, and the government isn't in charge of that timetable. That's a question for the regulator. But as soon as they do approve it, we will be ready to roll it out as we have the other vaccines. And we hope to do that in the second half of this year.
We obviously have targets to meet, and everybody wants to get schools reopened and all of that. But the vaccinations were down by 21% in this last week. That's the real worry. 21% is a lot, isn't it? That's almost 1 in 5 down from the week before. So what is that problem down to, and how is that being fixed as we speak?
Well, we have vaccinated over 7 million people so far, and we've always been clear that there would be bumps on the road, but 7 million people, and I can say that we are still confident that we will meet that target date of the 15th of February for vaccinating all our top 4 priority groups.
What we do know, though, as well, the 15th of February is a target, but also this Sunday is a target, isn't it, for all residents of care homes being vaccinated? That was another target that was set. What can you tell us about that? Are you close to fulfilling that target? Because as Ranvir says, as bumpy as that moment of supply is, 21% is a considerable drop this week.
Yeah, you haven't explained sort of how you're fixing it. Sorry, that was the detail.
So we are confident that we will meet that target in relation to care homes. We have already vaccinated 75% of people in care homes and 80% of people who are over 80. And so, we are very confident. I know in my own local area, we are confident that we will meet those deadlines and across the country too.
And that point that Ranvir made about sort of getting the supply back up and running, what are the government doing to ensure that that 21% trend, which is going down, turns around and goes the other way?
Well, the numbers fluctuate, and that's to some extent, supply and where the supply comes from. And we know that each batch has to be tested and go through a testing process. But what we set out very clearly was an end date. And we did say at the start of the rollout of the vaccination, we're not going to commit to what we do on any particular day, recognising that the figures might go up, might go down, but that what we will end to do is to have vaccinated all those groups by mid-February, and we are confident that we will.
Unfortunately, of course, there have been targets missed time and time again during this pandemic, and we know that. So perhaps people will be a little sceptical about, if you can't give the detail about how it's being fixed, about whether it will be fixed. But I suppose as each day goes on, and this time next week, we'll know whether the vaccination numbers have gone back up, of course. Wales are saying this morning that some of their schools may start to reopen after February half term. Parents in England and elsewhere will be wondering why that can't happen for them.
The Prime Minister set out very clearly what our plan is. And what our plan is we want to have vaccinated those priority groups by mid-February. Then we want to look at where we are, what is the death rate, what's the hospitalisation rate. We want to analyse that information, which we will be doing that week, and then we will be setting out our route map on the week of the 22nd of February. I think that's a realistic plan, and of course, it's fantastic if in other parts of the UK we can go quicker for whatever reason, but that is our plan in England.
What we know, though, is that primary school pupils, disadvantaged primary school pupils, are 7 months behind their peers, according to the findings of a new study. This learning gap due to COVID is getting wider and wider every single day, every single week, every single month that the delay in returning to schools is put back. I mean, that is a huge concern for parents up and down the country who are homeschooling at the moment, and not least the concern for the parents whose children don't have the facility to be able to homeschool.
We share that concern. I share that concern as a parent, and I share it as a government minister, and I know the government shares that concern, and particularly the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister did everything that he could to ensure that schools stayed open. But we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we need to take steps to protect the wider community. Of course, we recognise that people need to catch up. That's why we've already committed to £1 billion to support schools in our tutoring scheme, why we're rolling out laptops, why we announced this week another £300 million.
You've been trying to roll out laptops since
support.
March last year, and we're now in January, and still, you know, the poorest of children still don't have those laptops in many cases.
Well, let's focus on what we have done, which is 800,000 laptops rolled out. But it's not just a laptop issue in relation to remote education. It's all about, you know, I represent quite a rural constituency, and I fought very hard for broadband to be delivered. It's also about connectivity. So we've also rolled out mobile so that people can get better connectivity and, of course, increased data. So we're working on every front. And of course, those who cannot access remote education are vulnerable, can still go into school.
If we focus on what you have done, because of course there have been some highlights along the way, the vaccine programme is undoubtedly one of those. But we could talk about the poor system of track and trace, the very slow momentum about getting locked down, the introduction of travelling and travel corridors which have now been banned. We could talk about the situation over Christmas when you allowed families to mix together, and then we've seen the results of that. We could talk about the fact that we have an extraordinarily high death rate, which is to our eternal sort of shame as a country, that we haven't been able to control that better, and also the heartbreak and the tragedy for all those families that have missed and that have experienced what they have through COVID. These are some of the things that we could talk about, and unfortunately the government aren't talking about them. All we keep hearing from government ministers, and you're the person from the government that representative put up this morning, is that there will be time to take stock. We will be able to look down and consider what we got wrong. We need the government to be considering what is going wrong now. We're in the second wave now, and with every chance, if we can't get on top of this, that we could end up with COVID for a very, very long time to come as well. What do you say to all those people that are getting extraordinarily frustrated about the fact that the government won't admit to its mistakes and won't tell us what they've got wrong and how they're going to put that right?
Well, I don't really accept all of that. Of course, it's been a very difficult journey, but the government has been adapting and changing its methods throughout this. You know, in March, we had 3,000 tests a day. We now have 6,000. We've started manufacturing a whole variety of things, including PPE, which we didn't have at the beginning, and we now have a stockpile of 32 million items. We now manufacture lateral flow tests in this country, and the progress we have made on the vaccine is second to none across the world. You know, we were the first to regulate in relation to the vaccine. We were first to start vaccinations. We have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is
but we still have one of the highest death rates, 100,000. So what do you put that down to, if it's not partly incompetence from the government?
I put that down to the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and
so is the rest of the world.
I completely.
So is Taiwan, so is Australia, so is New Zealand.
I understand the tragedies that people have suffered as a result of this pandemic. I too lost my father this week, and I recognise the absolute horror of people who are suffering across the country. But the government has, at every stage, taken steps to protect the country from this virus, not only in relation to the vaccine, but the steps it has taken at every stage. Of course, things change, and we have changed with them. You mentioned travel, and we have at every stage thought about and reflected on the scientific evidence. But we are not alone as a country in taking measures in order and reflecting and changing. You know, Sweden took one particular course and has changed track. Now, I am the prisons minister, and in prisons we took a variety of measures early on to protect people from the pandemic, but we are learning lessons all the time. All the time we are changing our approach in prisons in order to save lives, protect people's mental health, and continue to protect those.
Sorry to hear about your own personal loss. We weren't aware of that. Do you mind saying, was it to do with coronavirus?
Well, I wasn't coming on to speak about my personal loss. I just
No,
wanted
it's just because
to
you
say,
mentioned it yourself, sorry, and it would seem remiss and unempathetic on our part and unkind in a way to not reflect our sympathy to you because, of course, you've suffered a loss of your father this week.
Yes, and so I understand how tragic it is for everybody else. My father didn't die of COVID, but he died with COVID, and so I
You have our
understand the
deepest
tragedy.
sympathies.
Thank you. But the government is working very hard at every level, recognising the tragedy that people are facing.
I imagine, as Ranvir says, just want to reiterate our thoughts with you and your family, Lucy Fraser, this morning. To share that with the nation, we heard Nadeem Zahawi sharing of a family member that he had lost, equally an uncle it was that he had lost, and actually how that resonates, because one of the problems that we have looking at our government ministers and representatives is we need to know that they understand what everybody is going through, and that's a really tangible reality for you and for your family. Has it given you pause to look at what you're doing daily to make sure that, you know what, you're going to push your colleagues, you're pushing everybody within the government to make sure everything that we are doing is to ensure that we can try and get on top of this virus and get on top of this death rate, which unfortunately just continues to be so horrific?
I think that is happening in government at every stage and at every turn. As the prisons minister, when the virus hit in March, we were told by PHE to expect 2,500 to 3,500 deaths within our prisons. And we took, and the prison service took, action to prevent that. And we worked incredibly hard, compartmentalizing people who had the virus, shielding people who had the virus, bringing in extra space so people didn't have to share cells. We brought in testing. And as a result of all that work that we have done, we have seen around 100 deaths, not the 2,500 to 3,500 that we're first anticipating. So the government is looking and working and reflecting at every stage, in every part, and in every department. And of course, things change, the science changes, but we are continuing to work hard to ensure that we beat the pandemic.